Welcome back. This is another session of chapter 2, which deals with semiconductor packaging. As I mentioned earlier, in this we are going to look at semiconductor fabrication. That will be a very quick overview. Then briefly we will see the first level interconnection choices. So, in the last class we basically touched upon the fundamentals of the building blocks of semiconductors. Okay. We talked about silicon and we talked about some compound semiconductors like gallium arsenide, then other compound semiconductors like cadmium selenide and so on. Now, we also saw the crystal structure of silicon and how bonding takes place in compound semiconductors by covalent bonding. We also listed the process steps for the fabrication of semiconductors. Right, and we also finally looked at a video which really talked about the major challenge of converting quartz or sand to silicon. Now, here we are talking about silicon that is electronic grade purity, and we are talking about 99.999 up to 11 nines percentage of purity. And we also talked briefly about the environment in the manufacturing setup, especially with regard to clean room facilities. I hope you can remember that we talked about various classifications for clean room like class 1, class 10, class 100, class 1000 and class 10,000 and what each of it denotes. For example, class 1 would denote 1 particle per cubic feet having a particle size of around 0.5 microns. So, you can expect the level of cleanliness when we talk about semiconductor fabrication or manufacturing, and we also briefly touched upon cost issues, because setting up a wafer fab is going to be expensive, and therefore, apart from the expense of setting up the fab, we also emphasized the cost of maintenance, especially as far as the clean room is concerned. So, that video was a very short clip and which really quickly took us from a basic sand material to a wafer, and then how a wafer is singulated into a basic die and then how it is packaged. So, the process flow is basically starting from silicon to formation of pure electronic grade silicon, then from there it goes to the formation of wafers, and from there formation of die, and this is basically known as a known good die, and from there the die is packaged, right. So, it can be a package containing an IC which is a microprocessor, a microcontroller, a power device and so on. So, this is the path flow for the semiconductor manufacturing including packaging. Today, I will take you through a series of photographs that illustrate what we have been discussing since the last class. So, initially first let us describe in a few words what is semiconductor fabrication. As you can see here listed in the slide, semiconductor device fabrication is the process used to create integrated circuits, silicon chips or microchips or active devices, as you can call them, that are present in everyday electrical and electronic devices. It is a multiple step process or a sequence of photographic followed by chemical processing steps, during which process the electronic circuits are gradually created on a wafer made of pure semiconducting material. It can be silicon or it can be compound semiconductors also, but silicon is the most commonly used semiconductor material today, along with various compound semiconductors. So, the requirement of compound semiconductors will arise when you want better electron mobility and for various other electrical properties that you may require for a particular microprocessor. There is also a case of ease of fabrication when you use compound semiconductors or silicon, and also based on your CAD design, how many layers of interconnect conductive material you are going to generate an interconnect between the layers. The entire manufacturing process from start to packaged chips ready for shipment takes about 6 to 8 weeks. So, that is a long process, and at each process, as I have emphasized, it goes through quality control check, and batch wise they are specifically checked for electrical test and functionalities. So, these are performed in highly specialized facilities referred to as fabs. Now, a question to all of us is, many of you may not be aware. So, how many fabs are there in India? Do we have fabs at all? If so, how many fabs are there? So, in India we have specifically semiconductor complex in Chandigarh, which is one of the oldest manufacturing units for semiconductor fabs in India, and we have other centers like the DRDO, Indian Space Research Organization, Bharat Electronics Limited. They have facilities that are limited, but at the same time some of them are state of the art. Okay. So, there may not be volumes manufactured here, more could be prototyping facilities for research, and semiconductor complex is a volume manufacturing unit. Okay. So, this is the information about what we have in India regarding semiconductor fabrication units. Now, from this photograph I will begin listing you or describing you the various process sequences. What you saw in the video is a very short clip. It is very difficult to quickly digest what has gone through the entire sequence. Here I will list one by one, so that it becomes very clear to you without any question or without any doubt in the manufacturing steps. So, I think any packaging engineer need to know about this, because finally you are going to handle bare die and then package it. Now, the starting material is sand. So, with about 25% mass, silicon is the second most common element in the earth's crust, okay, after oxygen. Sand, and you can call it as especially quartz material, has a higher percentage of silicon in the form of silicon dioxide and is the base or the basic ingredient for semiconductor manufacturing. Okay. So, we are going to start with silicon dioxide that is present in quartz. Now, how do you convert silicon dioxide to silicon? That is the first step, right. So, typically silicon dioxide is made to react with carbon, and this forms silicon plus carbon dioxide. Okay. So, this is the basic reaction, and this happens at higher temperatures. So, you get the first step of the formation of silicon. Now, after the silicon is formed, now you have to make it more pure. That means, you want to make it electronic grade silicon. So, electronic grade silicon is the highest purity that you can achieve. There are other grades of materials or metals or elements or compounds that are available. You call them as lab reagent, analytical reagent, and then comes the electronic grade material. So, in this case silicon is purified by multiple steps to finally reach a state called the electronic grade silicon, and that can be used in the semiconductor manufacturing arena. Okay. So, you basically have to do high temperature melting, and now you can get, the idea is to create one big single crystal, okay, from the molten silicon that you are processing at high temperatures. So, here if you can see this picture, what you are trying to do is do a seeding process for crystallization, because basically you want to create a single crystal, a large single crystal of silicon. So, the electronic grade material, after it has been recrystallized a number of times from a lower grade until it has reached 99.9999 11 nines purity, you try to melt it, then introduce a very pure crystal of silicon, that is again of the equivalent terms in percentage purity, then allow it to cool slowly. So, basically there is a container in which it is molten, and then there is a seed crystal, and then you slowly drag it out. Okay. Then you get what is known as a monocrystal called ingot. These are known as silicon ingots. This is the first step. Now, I want you to understand some other terms that might be used in the silicon manufacturing or design scenario as well. You will also come across a term called polycrystalline silicon, also called polysilicon or simply poly, that is a material consisting of small single crystals or crystallites of silicon. The structure of this is different from that of a single crystal silicon that you are seeing there in the picture above. Now, this single crystal silicon is used for electronics purposes and solar cells, and from amorphous silicon, they are different from the amorphous silicon, and these are used for thin film devices and also for solar cells. So, the polysilicon is used as a special material for building up the layers in the device during the fabrication. Okay. So, you call it as poly. So, this is the first step to get what is known as a ingot. As you can see in this picture here, this is a very good example of a monocrystal silicon ingot material that was molten and then slowly cooled to get a single crystal silicon ingot. Now, this ingot has been produced from electronic grade silicon. The properties, typically one ingot weighs about 100 kilograms and has a silicon purity of 99.99%. So, in some cases we have seen that these silicon ingots are very huge, as big as 1 meter. Okay. So, this is a very heavy block of pure silicon material, which will be the starting point for the wafer fabrication. Now, as you can see, the next step is you have to slice these ingots into individual silicon discs called wafers. That is the next process, right. As you can see here, what we are seeing, this wafer, typically this is about less than 1 mm thick, and today's process requires wafer in the diameter range of 300 mm to 450 mm. So, basically the ingots will also be prepared with those diameters, and then using a very good dicing process, this ingot is sliced into the wafers. Now, initially the wafers will be very thick, and that is on those wafers that you will build the dies, and finally they will be polished to a very thin wafer, because finally you do not want too much of unused silicon on the transistor. Therefore, after the imaging and after the buildup is completed, at the back end of the die, polishing will take place, so that you can reduce the thickness of the wafer. Right now it will be very rigid. So, thickness initially is very important, because if you start with a very thin wafer, during the process there can be warpage. In some cases the dies that you have generated can undergo some dimensional change because of continuous warpage. Your photolithography will not be exemplary. Therefore, the thickness, starting thickness, typically the recommended thickness will be around 675 to around 950 or 975 microns. Okay. So, warpage is very important, rigidity is very important. All of these are very important for process, because the wafer in lots of 25 will go through various chemical and mechanical processes. Okay. So, they have to sustain or withstand the chemicals. Various rinsing processes are going to be present during the cycle. Now, as I said earlier, grinding will take place finally after the entire process is completed, to reduce it to the required thickness of the die. Now, the wafers are polished. Once you get the first cut wafers, before you start doing the imaging process on the wafer, you want to make sure that there is no defect caused by the cutting or extraneous material or surface defects. So, basically you want to polish it, okay, and you can see that polishing can give you a very nice mirror like image, as you can see here. So, they should be flawless, mirror smooth surfaces need to be obtained. So, that is when you are ready to begin the imaging process. As I mentioned before, these photographs have been given to us for this particular course by Intel. Now, as an example, I want to say that companies like Intel, who are making the microchips or the microprocessors, they have the fabs. Sometimes instead of doing the wafers by themselves, they can directly buy the wafers from third party companies. So, there could be companies in this industry which will specialize on crystallization process, manufacturing or getting the ingots done to the required sizes and the diameters, and then slicing it into wafers, and then distributing these wafers to chip manufacturing companies like Intel or AMD and so on. Okay. So, that is the point I want to make here. So, as an example, you can see Intel's highly advanced 45 nanometer high K metal gate process uses wafers with a diameter of 300 around 12 inches. And when Intel first began making chips, the company printed circuits on 2-inch, that is 50 wafers. Now, the company uses 300 moving to 450, resulting in decreased cost per chip, and at the same time the yield is also very high. Now, the next step is typically imaging, but for imaging your CAD design onto the surface of the wafer, you need to have a medium that will translate or take up your design, okay, and realize it on the wafer. So, we go through what is known as a photoresist application process. Therefore, the next step is applying photoresist on the surface of the silicon wafer. In this picture, as you see, the blue color depicted is the liquid photoresist material that is applied. Okay. So, the liquid here is poured onto the surface of the wafer, and you have to make sure that the thickness of the photoresist is uniform throughout the surface of the wafer. You can't have uneven thicknesses from one end of the wafer to the other end. So, after the photoresist is applied, you have to measure the thickness, or by trial and error method, you have to make sure that if you take let us say x ml of the photoresist, okay, for a given area like this, and there are depending on different methods of coating, okay, how much thickness of the photoresist you will get on the surface of the wafer. Now, what are the coating methods that one can employ? Okay. Typically, in the semiconductor fabrication industry, people use what is known as a spin coating. Is a very common method. There can be instances where people can use curtain coating. Other methods that are well known in this industry is meniscus coating, or you can also have electrophoretic coating. Okay. So, these are the different methods that can give you very low thicknesses, very small thicknesses of the photoresist. Remember, this particular process has to be standardized to get very low thickness. You can't work with larger thicknesses of the photoresist because your line widths are very small, and you can't get a very high resolution and aspect ratio if your photoresist thickness is going to be large. Please remember this particular important issue when we talk about photoresist application. So, we have seen what are the coating methods. They can vary from industry to industry. They can also vary depending on the material that you are using, and these are typically for wet materials. Now, typically, as I said here, when a material is poured onto the wafer and it is spun around, okay, at a specific RPM, it depends on the viscosity of the material that you are using. So, accordingly, you will get a very thin and uniform application of the photoresist material on the surface. Now, the post process of this could be that there may be what is known as a tacky cure process. That means, some of the solvents will be evaporated by drying in an oven. Okay. So, in some cases the photoresist may have one solvent or a couple of solvents, and these have to be evaporated. Now, these solvents have to be environmentally accepted. You can't use organic solvents that are posing hazards to the environment. So, those things will be taken care by the industry. Now, we are talking about exposure, that is the next step. What is exposure? You are exposing this photoresist to UV light, okay? And when you are exposing this, you are going to use what is known as the mask. The mask or the photo tool, typically made on a glass substrate. This will be used to specifically transfer your design onto the surface of the photoresist. So, those areas which require capture of the design circuit will be translated onto the photoresist using UV light. So, exposure here means exposing the photoresist to a particular source of light, typically UV light. So, the photoresist finished is exposed to UV light. Obviously, there will be some chemical reaction that will be triggered by this exposure to UV light, and what happens is basically this thin film of material changes its chemical property, its physical property. That is the purpose of exposing this, and how you tackle this post exposure is known as developing process, which will define, okay, the latent image that is created initially on this photoresist. Now, there are different equipments for exposure, we are not going to deal with here. Typically, as I said, you are going to use UV light. Now, we are going to see what range in the spectrum you are going to use UV light. That depends on the material that you are going to use. This is not standard. So, initially you have to look at the material, look at the compatibility of the frequency or the wavelength of the UV light that you are using, and make some trial and run error findings. And if you are satisfied with the minimum error that you are getting from these set of experiments, then you can proceed with this. Or in some cases, the photoresist manufacturer will suggest the thickness and the UV intensity to be specifically used for the semiconductor fab applications. Now, this exposure to UV light happens, and those areas which are exposed to light will not become soluble in the developer, because the next step is developing process. Developing uses a particular chemical to remove unexposed photoresist. When I say unexposed to UV light. So, developing is a process which will remove unexposed photoresist material from the surface of the wafer. So, the exposure is done using masks, and this acts like a stencil which will block certain areas, which will allow certain areas to accept UV light. So, you have to make sure that there is no air gap between your mask and the surface of this wafer. This will transfer the various circuit patterns onto each layer of the microprocessor buildup. So, there can be multi layers 4, 5, 8 poly layers, and each of them requires a different mask, and each requires different exposure operations and developing operations to realize the circuitry. Now, as you can see from this picture, there will be a lens which will reduce the mask's image. So, typically what you will do is, this is for example the mask, and this is let us say the lens. Your mask will be of a larger size, let us say 3:1 or 5:1 and so on, and here you want a 1:1 translation. Therefore, the lens will project the image. Okay. Will downsize your image onto the wafer to get a 1:1 required ratio translated image. So, this is the lens here actually collimates, it does a good focusing and it brings a good resolution. So, typically in these kind of manufacturing, you do not want to start with a 1:1 mask, because if you use a 1:1 mask, you will lose up on the resolution. That is the reason why we start with a mask which is 3 times or 4 times or 5 times larger than the required dimensions. So, along this entire exposure process, you do not want to lose any change, any dimensional problem should not be there. You do not want to lose any features. Okay. And two things, one is the thickness of the photoresist and the time for exposure. Okay. Time is also very important. You can't keep exposing the photoresist material to UV light for an indefinite period of time. So, this is also recommended by the manufacturer. So, all these properties are interrelated, and to get a good image with a high resolution, you need to work up on all these issues. So, typically after exposure, as you can see, certain areas are affected, certain areas are not, that depends on the mask. Hundreds of microprocessors are built on a single wafer. Now, this entire process sequence that I am showing here will show you how the buildup is done for a single die. Now, basically we will see a single transistor build. Okay. Now, a transistor acts as a switch controlling the flow of electrical current in a computer chip. Now, Intel researchers have developed transistors so small that about 30 million or more can be fitted into the area as small as the head of a pin. So, you can imagine now with this particular statement as an example, what kind of exposure methods, what quality of photoresist material, what quality of glass mask needs to be present in the manufacturing, and therefore, that is a big challenge on the equipment manufacturing also. Okay. Now, other advanced exposure methods briefly I have discussed in the last class, because we are trying to get to the end of the tunnel in some sense, because there are limitations with UV exposure imaging. Therefore, other methods like electron beam lithography, X-ray lithography and so on, or excimer laser photolithography, all these are coming up, and probably the next few years we will see these lithography methods taking dominance in this industry. Now, once the photoresist is applied and you have exposed and also you have developed, okay, you are now seeing the image of one of the layers. As you can see, the blue layer is present, that represents those areas of the photoresist that need to remain there, protecting certain areas of the base material or the silicon here, or the silicon dioxide as the case may be. Now, the unexposed photoresist is completely dissolved by the solvent, which I mentioned briefly now. So, this process of exposure plus the developing will give you a completed image, right. So, this reveals a pattern of the photoresist made by the mask. Now, the types of photoresist can be dry or wet, it can be positive photoresist or a negative photoresist. Developers typically, the developing material or the developing chemical can be aqueous, they can also be organic, but organic solvents need to be environmentally friendly. Then there is a lot of rinsing done during this fabrication process. Rinsing is done with water. So, we have to use deionized water, which is free from all the anions and cations that are normally present in impure water. So, we need to use deionized water and drying. So, drying is the final step. Okay. So, a combination of exposure, developing, rinsing will give you a completed one set of a complete process in the manufacturing or in the imaging sequence. Now, if you use a positive photoresist or if you use a negative photoresist, then the developers will change. So, I am not going to spend too much time on this. We will discuss types of photoresist in the PWB technologies section, because these are very similar processes. Okay. Therefore, we will talk about what kind of mask you will have to use when you use a positive photoresist and what type of a mask you will have to use when you use a negative photoresist. The mask is not identical for each of the resists, because the developing process is dissimilar. Therefore, and when to use a positive mask and when to use a negative mask depends on what kind of image area of the circuit you need to have on the surface of the wafer. It can be the first step or the nth layer. Okay. So, depending upon the interconnection pattern and depending upon the availability of certain chemicals and equipments, you have to carefully choose the photoresist type. Then once this photoresist, which is basically cured now, cured at specified temperatures, so that it becomes very hard, okay, and it protects certain areas on the wafer. Now, you want to remove unwanted material from at this stage from the base substrate. So, the next process is called etching. The photoresist is now protecting the material and it should not be etched away. Therefore, one of the conditions is that the etchant should not remove or it should not react with the photoresist. So, etchant, there are different types. Now, in this case you have the photoresist also. The compatibility has to be studied and the etchant should not react with the photoresist. The revealed material, that is the material where the photoresist is not present currently, will be washed away by the etchant chemical. Now, if you look at the etchant material, there are different types of etchants. You can also do dry etching, that is plasma or you can also do dry etching, which is basically plasma etching or reactive ion etching. Typically, we use wet etching, that is by chemical. For example, for silicon, potassium hydroxide KOH is the etchant. There may be other etchants for different materials, even in the same semiconductor fab process. Now, the resolution after etching is what is more critical, and you have to spend a lot of time examining the trace widths that you have generated after etching, and this should be equivalent to your design implementation plus minus certain tolerances. So, at every stage of the process, there are certain tolerance values that you can give and then qualify the wafer. So, in etching also you have a lot of problems, because you can have different types of etching, isotropic etching and anisotropic etching. Some chemicals are isotropic and you can use some etchants that are anisotropic. So, depending upon the thickness that you have and depending upon the rate of etching that you want to have, you can choose between isotropic and anisotropic etchants. Each will give different types of defects. Okay. So, one has to be very careful to choose the etchant type. Plasma etching involves reaction of, let us say, two different gases which produces some free radicals, and these free radicals will react with your substrate material, thereby removing it. Okay. So, in situ generated free radicals or ions will react with the surface, and that is known as plasma or reactive ion etching. So, etching is a very important step. Now, after the etch process is done, as you can see, material has been removed. If you compare the previous one and this one, you can see certain blocks of the material have been removed. Now, you can remove the original photoresist material. You can see that the blue layer is removed here, right. So, the desired shape is now visible and this step is now complete, that is the first level imaging is now complete. Now, for removing the photoresist, you use materials known as resist strippers, stripping chemicals, and they can be aqueous, in some cases organic. These strippers, after the stripping process is over, it should not leave any residue on the surface of the wafer, because any residue will be taken over to the next step if the rinsing process is not complete or well done. Therefore, after the stripping process, you again do a quality check, okay, and you have to qualify the wafer at this stage also. So, a good time is spent on inspection for the residues. Now, again you are going back to the photoresist application. This time the reason is you want to dope or implant some ions or use some dopants. I talked about dopants in the last class, dopants like phosphorus or boron, okay, or copper or arsenic. These are some of the dopants. They are used, okay, to change the property of the semiconductor to improve the electron mobility, and therefore, the next step will be in those areas where the transistors are going to be defined, you are going to do some kind of a doping. So, you have to predetermine what dopant you are going to use. So, the area that takes up the dopant here is well marked here by these arrows you can see. So, the other areas are covered with the photoresist. So, this is a photoresist material. So, again we start with the photoresist application, baking, and then you keep the area exposed for doping. So, the photoresist will protect the area and this area will not take any dopants. This is the ion implantation process. There are different materials, equipments that will be used for ion implantation. Basically, you require bombarding of these ions onto the surface of the silicon wafer, okay. And therefore, these ions during this process are implanted into the silicon wafer to alter the way the silicon in these areas need to conduct the electricity. Therefore, this is very specific. This is specific to the areas that are exposed. The areas that are covered by the photoresist are not altered, they are not affected. So, if you look at this, ions are shot onto the surface of the wafer at very high speed. It is a bombardment that takes place, only then the doping or implantation can take place. The electrical field accelerates the ions at a speed of 185,000 miles per hour. So, okay, it breaks into the crystal lattice and then it creates a new environment for the conducting for improving the conduction property. Now, you remove the photoresist. Once that job is over, you remove the photoresist and the material that should have been doped green in this case has now got the dopants, the new material implanted, okay. And you can see there will be variations in the properties of these host material plus the dopant. Now, the transistor is now close to being finished. 3 holes have been etched onto the insulating layer, okay. So, this magenta material is the insulating layer. You want to insulate it because that particular process is over. So, you convert the surface into an oxide and then make it passive. So, you make it convert it into an oxide. So, these holes are generated now and these holes will be filled with the copper conducting material, which will finally be the connectors for these transistors. Okay. I hope it is very clear. The top surface is magenta in color, which is the passive oxide layer, and the arrows shown here which represent the 3 holes represent the transistors for this particular device. Now, how do you make this area conductive? The exposed area, as you have seen the previous slide, the open areas need to be plated with a conductor. Typically, we are going to use copper. In this particular example, we have taken up a process called electroplating. So, electroplating, as all of you know, basic electrochemistry, you have a anode and a cathode, and then you have an electrolyte, and then you apply external DC, and then due to the transport of ions through the electrolyte at the cathode, the metal will be deposited. Okay. So, the metal from the pure anode will dissolve into the electrolyte and then they will be deposited onto the cathode. So, in this case, since we are using copper, we can take copper sulphate solution at this stage, and the copper ions are deposited onto the transistor areas, that is the terminals here representing the 3 holes of the transistors, and this will nicely deposit a required thickness. So, the basic anode, cathode, then you have the electrolyte, and then you have the external DC connection, as you know. So, from the anode to the cathode, there will be a ion transportation which will deposit on the cathode. Now, you have to make sure that the materials are pure, the copper material is very pure here, and also thickness here has to be well understood, because you can't keep depositing larger thicknesses of copper. So, you can by certain calculations and by adjusting the current density that you give in the electroplating process for a given area, you can calculate the required thickness of copper, and that will be deposited over a period of time. So, current density and the agitation, then oxygen content, the purity, all of these matter to get a required thickness, area to be plated. These are all important factors in determining a good deposit. The deposit should adhere well to the host surface and it should not delaminate. So, other deposition methods could be physical vapor deposition, chemical vapor deposition or evaporation or sputtering, all these are other methods. So, it need not be electroplating alone that can be used. There are other methods that can be used for depositing the conductor material. So, after electroplating on the wafer surface, the copper ion settle as a thin layer of copper. You can see here very nicely the entire surface has been covered with copper, including these areas which were which define the transistors, right. Now, as I mentioned to you before, metallization can also be done by CVD, evaporation or sputtering. So, in any case here thickness is very important. Now, this is a different example. In this case, for example, the conductor is aluminum rather than copper, and you can see how the source, drain and the gate are defined, how the field oxide is deposited, there is a dielectric layer, and then here comes the metallic conductor, okay. And then finally, they are polished, because obviously you can't deposit the exact amount of the conductor material. Therefore, you will use what is known as a polishing methodology or CMP, as it is known as chemical mechanical planarization, and the excess material that you saw in the previous slide here will now be polished and removed, and finally, you will get only the required amount of copper that is now acting like a plug for your source and the drain of the and the gate of the transistor. Therefore, this polishing is going to be a very important step, and this determines the final thickness of the conductor layer. So, CMP, as it is known, is an abrasive process using chemical slurries. That means, you take the wafer and it will be ground on an equipment, and until you remove the excess copper from the surface. So, if this is the grinder surface, there will be a wet slurry coming and falling on this material. There will be an abrasive material that be used, and the silicon wafer is polished continuously, inspected, and you have to see whether we have reached the designated thickness. So, the smooth surface is now necessary to maintain photographic depth of subsequent steps, because again this is not the end of the process, right. You are now going to build additional layers. So, you require to maintain minimum thickness, and also this CMP process should not deform the build up that you have already done. Okay. If you have, it is going to deform or create cracks in the conductor build up, then the entire effort is lost. So, CMP is going to be a very crucial step in defining, as you can see, the final thickness of the conductor. Now, you can see in this particular picture, this is a consolidated. Now, we have seen one complete process step. Now, subsequent steps can continuously be done in the same way by repeating the cycle. So, this particular figure will give you a very good information or understanding how to create interconnects now. Now that the basic transistors have been formed in the base layer, now we are going to interconnect between transistors using different layers. So, this picture here shows you how interconnect wires are formed to connect the various transistors below. So, this is also known as the wire. So, wiring density here is very important, and you have to, in this particular case, for example, the connections here are between various layers of copper interconnected by small vias. Micro vias are used to create connection, established connection between various conductors. Now, there may be 8, 10, 20 layers of interconnect layers in very complex systems, and if you look at a magnified view of a chip, you will see intricate network of circuit lines and transistors that look like a multi-layer building. Okay. So, like a Manhattan skyline or a Manhattan building, you can see the various interconnect structures, tall and very fine thicknesses. So, use of micro via structures or use of vias are very essential to interconnect. Now, once this is done, once the complete interconnections are done, we basically go for a wafer sort test. What is this basically? Now, you have to look at every wafer and do electrical test, okay, functionality test. So, in this stage, patterns are fed into every single chip and the response from the chip is monitored and compared to the required electrical function. Okay. So, basically you can do an electrical test, so that to ensure that your buildup is correct and every single die can be looked into this particular test. So, basically you can do an electrical probe test or a flying probe test. So, finally, after this electrical test is done, the wafer is now sliced. It is cut into pieces called dies. So, at this stage, probably after the test is over, we can now singulate each of them. This is by using diamond saw. So, this is the process which I mentioned, where in a wafer flat, as you have seen in the last class, there will be some scribe lines. So, the cutting has to take place along these scribe lines. Okay. So, that depends on the crystal structure, and it is very important that the scribe areas are well defined. Its thickness is also defined alongside the diamond saw thickness, and when you slice it also, you have to make sure that the adjacent dies are not affected due to vibration or other factors in the equipment. Now, after the dies are singulated, you get single dies now, and you have to qualify it as a known good die, KGD. So, again you can probably do a electrical test for each of these dies, and you can put it through a series of programmed testing, which will say whether this die has passed the requisite test. So, this is how you will get an individual die. Now, this die has been cut in the previous process, as you have seen, by the dicing process. So, the die shown here is that of a Intel Core i7 processor, which is very current. So, this completes the front end process of the fabrication of or making of a single die. Now, the single die will go into the back end process called packaging to get a single chip package. So, I want to emphasize here that inspection and measurement and quality control at every stage. The steps that we have mentioned may not exactly be the same, because there may be very many intermediate steps, including rinsing, other methods of cleaning and inspection and so on. So, it takes a while from the silicon wafer to a single die to be complete. Okay. So, at each step, the quality control personnel will have to look for various defects and certify it. Right from inspecting the mask has to be perfect. There can be no dimensional variations in the mask. If there is a dimensional variation seen, then you have to prepare a new mask. Okay. Wafer inspection, then you have metrology and critical dimension inspections at every stage, including photoresist, defect inspection. This also goes into yield calculations, yield percentage calculations, and parametric inspections. Critical issues will be fine geometries, how they are well defined, and then you have to probably keep note of what has gone into various batches of the processes, including data control, process control difficulties, and so on. So, in the manufacturing, it is a large cycle that has to be completed, and tomorrow or in the next class we will see the back end process. In the back end process, as I mentioned earlier, we are going to take this singulated die that we have just got from the front end process, and we will see how it is again tested, assembled and packaged before it goes into a electronic product. So, the summary of today's class is that we have seen a complete illustration package covering the front end process. Thank you.